Late Cuban leader Fidel Castro's ashes were interred in a somber private funeral on Sunday, December 4th, a culmination of 9 days of mourning after his death was announced by brother and current president Raul Castro on Friday, November 25th. The interment of those ashes in Cuba's second city of Santiago was the final chapter after two mass memorials and hundreds of thousands of people coming out onto the streets to meet the cortege carrying Castro's ashes, traveling over 1,000 kilometers from Havana to his final resting place in a cemetery near the mausoleum of Cuban national hero Jose Marti. Due to restrictions placed on broadcasters at the time by Cuban national television, we are now belatedly able to bring you the visuals of the funeral that took place on a clear Sunday morning in Santiago on December 4th.
The fossil hominid sites at Sterkfontein Caves, known as Cradle of Humankind, were declared a World Heritage Site on the 2nd of December 1999. The Cradle of Humankind covers an area of over 47,000 hectares of privately owned land northwest of Johannesburg. Most of the site is on dolomite, a rock type which is slightly soluble in water. There are currently over 200 caves on the site and 13 fossil sites. We know that Australopithecus africanus were present in the cradle from about 2 to 4 million years ago. It is generally known that hominids are close relatives of human ancestors.
Did you know the big hole digging started in 1871 and ended on the 14th August 1914? The hole produced 2,722 kgs of diamonds. However, one diamond as huge as 490 carat of stone found in the open prior 1868 gave them the interest to dig. Extracted from 22.5 million tons of soil. Today, the hole sits at a breathtaking 214 meters deep. Kimberley Big Hole attracts tourists from all over the world, taking a vintage tram past the city, then cycling around the Big Hole.
South Africa's friendship with Cuba is deep-rooted, stemming in large part from Cuba's intervention in Angola in the 1970s. That would in part lead not only to the consolidation of power by the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the MPLA, that continues to govern there, but also the later defeat of South African Defence Force soldiers in that country that sped up Namibia's transition to independence. President Jacob Zuma was afforded a prime speaking spot at the first of two memorials in Havana shortly after Fidel Castro's passing. Mzwandile Mbeje sat down with President Jacob Zuma in Pretoria to discuss this revolutionary hero.
I'd met him a number of times. You remember one time he came to attend a conference here in South Africa. I'd also met him even before that, even when we were still in exile. But when I went there as paying a state visit, it was another kind of experience, because here I was going representing and representing South Africa. And of course I met the president, the other Castro, who is also an amazing man. Then I had an opportunity to meet President Fidel Castro. I found him as energetic as he was, as analytic. He spent time analyzing the balance of forces globally and what was happening and what he thought we needed to do in the developing countries.
Fidel was a great inspiration to all of us, so says former President Thabo Mbeki, speaking shortly after news of his death broke. The former president received Cuba's highest honor for foreign dignitaries in 2001, the Jose Marti Award, a medal pinned on then President Mbeki by then President Fidel Castro himself. Up next, South Africa's second democratic president, on Castro's legacy and the strong bonds that bind these two countries together.
The majority of the population of Cuba stayed very loyal to the revolution, very loyal to the government. And I'm saying that's precisely why, over all of these years that the U.S. maintained this position of the isolation of Cuba, that they never succeeded to get to see the government of Cuba overthrown. It's because basically the population of Cuba supported the government. I think President Obama was correct. The U.S. policy whose focal intention was the overthrow of the Cuban government and change of the system in Cuba, that thing had failed over many decades. It was pointless. It was never ever going to succeed. And I'm saying in a situation in which the rest of Latin America had turned against the Americans on this Cuban matter, clearly the Americans were feeling even more and more isolated on this thing. The policy is not working. All it's done is just end as a lot of enemies or opponents. Why do you perpetuate it? It's not going to do anything to the Cubans, but it's producing negative results for the U.S. in terms of system of international relations. And I think that President Obama and the others were quite correct, even in the interest of the U.S., to say let's abandon this unproductive and counterproductive for the Americans, a counterproductive policy of the attempted isolation of Cuba.
Among the African dignitaries in attendance at the mass memorial the night before Castro's funeral in Santiago was AU Commission Chair Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I met her for a brief exchange outside her hotel in Havana, Cuba.
We want to celebrate this extraordinary life, an extraordinary human being who was driven by the love of humanity. He hated to see anyone oppressed, even if it meant sending his people to make the highest sacrifice to see other people free. He did it. He hated to see people without health services, without education. So as we speak, we have thousands and thousands of Cubans in Africa, in Latin America, doctors, teachers, engineers, and others. As we speak, we have thousands and thousands of students here from Latin America, from Africa. But all this done by a country that doesn't have wealth. It just has the love of people.
Among the circle of family and close confidants invited to the very private funeral of Fidel Castro was General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, Dr. Bladen Nzimande. Foreign editor Sophie Mokoena sat down with him at the famed Hotel Nacional in Havana.
Turning to Cuba and the U.S., for years, Cuba and U.S. had this frosty relationship, but President Obama found a way to ensure that there's a way forward in terms of enhancing the relationship. But unfortunately, currently you have the president-elect, Donald Trump, who seems to be not interested in reviving the relations or strengthening the relations. What are the implications?
We hope that what has been started by both President Obama and President Raul Castro will last and will lay a foundation for the ultimate removal of the illegal blockade, by the United States against Cuba. Of course, at the moment, we are quite concerned about what I would really call very disturbing rantings, by the president-elect Trump. He is totally unpredictable. He is totally inexperienced in terms of politics to begin with. We're not even sure whether he wants to run America as if he's actually running his own Trump properties, and so on. But we are hoping that what President Obama and President Raul started wasn't just informed by the change of heart on the side of President Obama. The reality is that there are a lot of American economic interests that would like to invest in Cuba, for instance. And they are concerned that companies from other parts of the world are going to overtake them. For instance, many American farmers have an interest in selling their agricultural products in Cuba, but at the moment they are prevented because of the blockade. And what's beginning to happen is that countries from outside this region are capturing the markets in Cuba in a manner that can prejudice American companies. We think that at the end of the day, that is what is likely to determine what happens. And we hope that they won't be going back, because if this country can be allowed to pursue its own development path, Cuba, it would have been far advanced by now were it not for this illegal blockade.
so people with prosthesis can live normal life.
Prosthesis actually manufactures the artificial limbs.
I can pick up stuff. My friends think it's awesome. I like my life.
I can walk normally. There's nothing that I can do. It changed my life from the beginning to where I am now.
Dystrophic dysplasia is a type of dwarfism that affected all my major limbs.
Join Health Talk every Saturday for all your health news.
Also in Cuba to pay his respects was the leader of the economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema, who lauded the political consciousness of Cubans he believes South Africans need more of. I asked him if Cubans could learn anything from South Africa.
You do speak about Cuba in very glowing terms, whether it's about their free education, free healthcare, the impressive literacy rate they have in this country. What is it about Cuba, the philosophy, the broader perspective that they can teach South Africans?
Well, one of the things that we can learn about the Cubans is that they are highly politically conscientized. They are aware of themselves, they are aware of their surrounding, and they understand what constitutes progress and what constitutes the enemy. And they've come to appreciate that they are in the situation they are because of the choice they've made of not wanting to follow what the big brother America says they must do. And they know that if it was not of illegal embargo imposed on them, they were actually going to be a much, much more better country. Look at them, they've succeeded, the better education, better health care, the illiteracy levels are extremely low under difficult circumstances. There are many countries which don't suffer from embargo like our country. The illiteracy levels are too high. The quality of education, the quality of primary health care is nothing compared to a country which is suffering from a serious economic embargo. So we can learn from the Cubans through their determination, through their appreciation that they are a unique nation and they've chosen their path and they will live by their conviction.
One of the mistakes which some political analysts make is to think that their enemies should be our enemies. Yasser Arafat, Colonel Gaddafi, Fidel Castro support our struggle to the hilt. There is no reason whatsoever why we should have any hesitation about hailing their commitment to human rights as they are being demanded in South Africa. Our attitude is based solely on the fact that they fully support the anti-apartheid struggle. They do not support it only in rhetoric. They are placing resources at our disposal for us to win the struggle.
Well, my president, my brother.
President, my brother.
How are you?
My brother.
Please. Please. Very nice to see you.
Están contentos de verlo.
Please sit down.
Están contentos. Por favor, tenga bien sentarse.
Please sit down.
Siéntese.
Now, one thing before we say anything.
Una cosa antes de hablar, nada.
Before we say anything.
Antes de hablar absolutamente de cualquier tema.
You must tell me when you are coming to South
Me
Africa.
tiene que decir cuándo viene para Sudáfrica.
1994, Mandela's wish came true. Fidel Castro amongst the guests at the Union buildings, as South Africa ushered in a new democracy. Certainly more profound and controversial Castro's 1998 address to the National Assembly in Cape Town. This report by Lihana Tsoteti details how one side of the House was in awe and the other, the silence, was loud.
Members of the National Party seemed to show no appreciation. The Democratic Party did not attend the sitting, and the Freedom Front described him as an oppressor of human rights.
The Democratic Party believes it's completely inappropriate for the Democratic Parliament of South Africa to confer this honour on a ruthless dictator.
Despite these remarks, the bilaterals between South Africa and Cuba are unwavering. All ANC presidents since Nelson Mandela have walked the soil of the Caribbean island.
Not only are we Cuban, but part of humanity, and we fight for the honor and well-being of all humankind.
And over the years, bilateral agreements have strengthened, even after Castro handed over the reins to his brother Raul in 2008. Whether it is South African students studying in Cuba or Cuban doctors in South Africa, the relationship stretched wide.
One of the successes of this visit is that we have finalized a 210 million rand credit line package to Cuba.
It is this handshake at the memorial of Nelson Mandela which many believe led to the moment that would lead to the reopening of the U.S. Embassy in Havana.
The reopening of the American Embassy in Havana for the first time in 54 years.
To the man who has reportedly survived more than 600 assassination attempts, the man who led Cuba for nearly 50 years, who remained unshaken despite U.S. economic sanctions.
Cuba!
Many in South Africa say, hamburger.
The leader of the revolution was consistent with that view, insisting that when he dies, his name and image would never be utilized to designate institutions, plazas, parks, avenues, streets, and other sites.
We are Fidel, Santiago is Fidel, socialism is Fidel.
And that concludes our special broadcast of the funeral of the late Cuban leader Fidel Castro. From all of us here at SABC News, thank you for watching.